Welcome back to Root Double. Sympathy for the Devil. It's time for Jun to encounter Subject N.
よーし、じゃあ私が先に入って安全を確かめよう。
そうだな、頼む。
はい、任せて。
Jun went through the opening in high spirits. On the other side of the gate, all they'd found there was the unidentified body of a girl. Natsuhiko witnessed that sight through Jun's eyes. This is when Jun was infected with malice. And shouldn't that girl be showing up any second now? A remnant of Subject N's spirit must be here.
なあ、そうだろう。被験体 N。
Natsuhiko spoke to the corpse.
さあ、出てきてくれ。ジュンさんの中から、お前の悪意を消してやる。
This is where Okita got infected. When Natsuhiko shouted that,
私を殺すのかい？
Subject N answered. She slowly stood up and glared at Natsuhiko. Natsuhiko looked back at her, then replied.
殺すんじゃない。記憶を元の形に修復するだけだ。
違うね。あんたがやってることは修復じゃない。だいたい元の形って何さ？あんたがそう思い込んでるだけでしょ？それを歪めて自分の都合のいいように作り変える。それを修復だなんてちゃんちゃらおかしいね。
確かにお前の言う通りかもしれない。だけどお前を放置していたら本当に死人が出るんだ。精神世界の話じゃない。現実の世界でだ。それを見過ごすわけにはいかないんだよ。
正義の名のもとに殺すか。いいね。実にヒーロー的だ。私の肉体はもう死んでいる。純の記憶の中に残した私の名残もあんたが消した。あんたが私を消滅させるんだ。いくらでも言い繕うことはできるけど、それはやっぱり殺人さ。
Perhaps.
それを躊躇しないあんたには人殺しの素養があるよ。純と同じにね。
Ooh. Those words sent a shock through Natsuhiko's mind.
ジュンさんと同じ？お前、僕だけじゃなくてジュンさんに人殺しの素養があるっていうのか？
God, that's ironic considering Jun was psyching herself up to kill for what she perceived to be a good cause. And that twisting Jun's thoughts to malice involved making her believe she had no choice but to kill someone for what she believed to be a good cause.
当然じゃん。今さら何を？
Subject N snorted.
ねえ、一説多生って言葉を知ってるかい？純が嫌いな言葉なんだけどさ。
いきなり何の話だ？
一人を殺す代わりに大勢を助けられるならそうすべきっていう考え方だよ。嫌いなくせに純が選んだことさ。あんただってさっきの純の言葉を聞いたでしょ？
At that moment, Subject N's voice turned into Jun's.
そんなことどうして言える？一度人を殺そうとした人間がどうして改心したと言えるのさ。いいかい？人が殺されてからじゃ遅いんだ。死んだ人は絶対に戻ってこないんだ。私だってこんなことしたくないよ。でも万が一の犠牲者が出てから後悔するくらいなら、私はシリウスをやめてでもこいつに手を下せ。この子の心の中には人の命を救うってことしかない。そのためには人を傷つけてもいいと考えてる。矛盾しているようで一貫しているよ。
Oh.
ここまでこの子の心を見てきたならわかるだろう。純は弱い女だ。コンプレックスの塊だし、だから闇雲に自分を鍛えてきた。
Quite a few.
他者への依存性も高い。渚だお姉ちゃんだ隊長だっていつも誰かを求めている。
Wow, that's spot on.
頼られることでしか 自分の価値を確認できないんだよ。そしてそんな弱っちい自分を憎んでいる。それが他人への攻撃性に転化するのさ。人命を守るっていう大義名分があると余計にあっさりとね。私が記憶を改ざんした後、純がどうなったかわかるかな。みんなの命を救おうと思うあまり、怪しい奴はぶっ殺そうと思ったんだよ。
The scene in front of them changed the moment subject N said that. It was a memory of Jun's from just a few hours ago. Jun was walking through a connecting passageway while cursing under her breath. Bastard hit me on the head from behind. It wasn't the captain. Mr. Ukita was the culprit. If he stole the AD, then I gotta do something. Gotta do it if I want to save everyone.
辛くても頑張らなきゃ。だってさ、分かったろ。純は自分を殴った浮田さんを殺そうと思ったんだよ。
黙れ。
これは私が改ざんした記憶じゃないよ。純が実際に発言した事実さ。AD が亡くなってみんなの命が危機にさらされたと思って、それでテンパってたにしてもちょっとひどすぎるね。体調のことも疑ってたじゃん。挙句の果てにはあんたたちのことさえ疑って本末転倒もいいとこだ。浮田さんに弱い人間って言ってたけど、純こそが間違いなく。
黙れって言ってるんだ。
Natsuhiko interrupted subject N.
お前は純さんのことを何も分かっちゃいない。純さんはヒーローになりたかったんだ。悪いやつをやっつけるんじゃない、人を救うヒーローに。純さんがどれだけ自分を責めてきたかお前には分からないのか。友達を救えなかったことがどれだけ純さんの心の傷になってきたか。その傷に耐えて自分の弱さと向き合って、それを乗り越えて、そして純さんは強くなったんだ。
Subject N's face warped slightly at those words.
分かってるさ、そのくらい。私は純だから、純は私だから。
だったらどうして純さんの傷をえぐるようなことを言う。純さんの心がまともじゃなくなっていたことくらいわかるだろう。そしてそれがお前のせいだっていうことも。
へえ、記憶改ざんのせいだけじゃなくて純に私が取り付いていたとでも。
And I'm not saying that, but unless you're implying that it's more of an effect. Unless you're implying that I'm asking if you had more of an effect on Jude's behavior than just a memory alteration.
取り付いていたってのとは少し違う。だけどお前は純さんに BC を使った。
Yes.
BC は言葉や記憶だけじゃなくて思いを人に伝える。
Oh?
言葉にならないことも思い描けないよう。それは情報エネルギーとして純さんの頭の中に残ってしまった。それを受け取った純さんは普通の純さんじゃなくなってたんだ。
ロマンチックなお話だね。死者の思いが聖者に残るって。
ああ、ここにお前がこうして存在していることが、僕と会話できているということがその証拠だ。 あの渚って子がジュンさんの心に残り続けているように。
その名前を出すんじゃない。
Ooh. Subject N glared at Natsuhiko.
ムカつくんだよあいつ。死んで9年も経つのにジュンの心にずっと残りやがってさ。
お前もジュンさんの心に残りたかったのか。
Feels like one of the rare times that she's actually looking directly at us.
当たり前だろ。誰かと心をつないでその人の中に思いを残したい。それが私らコミュニケーターなんだから。
そうか、そうだよな。でもお前がジュンさんの心に残っている限りジュンさんはジュンさんじゃなくなっちゃうんだ。お前は消えなきゃならないんだよ。
Subject N gave a resigned laugh when she heard that.
結局は私を消すわけだ。一説多生の精神でもって。
I suppose we do.
そんなかっこいいもんじゃない。個人的な動機だ。
そりゃなおたちが悪いね。快楽殺人者と一緒だよ。いや、ヒーローってのは案外そんなものなのかもね。
It was getting too painful for Natsuhiko to keep on listening to her. He heard Yuri's voice echo in the corners of his mind.
ひかり、この子を消してあげて。この子がジュンさんの写しみならこんな言葉を望んで言ってるわけじゃない。
Yeah, I know. Subject N probably regretted her own actions and longed to be erased. She had been egging Natsuhiko on the whole time to goad him into finishing the job. Natsuhiko had to justify his actions that way, or else he couldn't bring himself to carry out the duty.
お前を殺すよ、被験体 N。
She smiled at those words.
やるなら早くやりなよ、ヒーロー。そんでせいぜい長生きして罪の意識に苦しみな。
ああ、生きている限りずっとな。
And so as he listened to Subject N taunting him even at the very end, Natsuhiko erased Subject N from Jun's mind. Natsuhiko and Yuri returned to reality. The first thing Natsuhiko saw was Jun slowly falling down with the engine cutter still in hand.
ジュンさん。
Natsuhiko promptly caught Jun by the hand. An intense shock ran through his body and pain ran through his wounds, yet he still did not let go. His body wasn't the only thing in pain. Oof. Pain ran through his head again, just like what happened when he had erased the Subject N inside of Ukita. He was also struck with that bizarre discomfort that seemed like his brain was being shaken. Pain and discomfort were clearly more intense this time.
ヒコリ、まさかまた。
Yuri raised her voice when she noticed something wrong with Natsuhiko, but he promptly replied with telepathy.
ユリ、その話は今はしないでくれ。予想通り、どうやら被験体 N と接触するたびに僕の脳はダメージを受けているらしい。でもそれをここで口に出してもしょうがない。みんなに心配かけるだけで事態は何も好転しない。だからこのことは僕らの間だけの秘密にしておこう。
Yuri looked at Natsuhiko with worry, but she eventually replied with telepathy.
分かったよ。でもどうか無理はしないでね。
I feel like there's... Half of me says, trust your friends to at least hear... Trust the others to at least hear out the problem. The other half says, who's going to care about if... Who's going to care about or understand the problem that he's going through? Like, when even Enna, the quote-unquote BC professor, can't explain how one of these works. Then I don't. It's gonna be difficult to make the others understand if it comes down to it. Natsuko nodded at those words. Don't force myself, huh? He appreciated the sentiment, but there was no way he could take Yuri up on those words. No matter how much damage his brain took, he had to keep fighting Subject N until everyone was free from malice. In the same way that Watase had tried to save everyone no matter how much damage his body took. Uh-huh. Now isn't that exciting? Will my brain crumble first? Or will I erase all of Subject N's malice first? It's a battle of wits. A smile of bravado formed on Natsuhiko's lips. And Nokita called out for him as he waited for his headache to subside. Okay, we are continuing now. I apologize for the unclean cut, but God, I just started. You can probably tell that occasionally I tend to drag a little bit when I record long videos. In either this game or Phoenix Wright games, because it's a lot of reading. But for some reason, when I started recording this video, like 20 minutes in, it just started crashing really hard. Didn't get the best sleep the night before, so just like really. It's like one of those things where you really can't even concentrate on the words on the screen at the moment, so it isn't necessary to just take a break and cut from it entirely. Ironically, that happened right around when Natsuhiko started having a massive headache.
どうしたの天下君。
傷が痛むのかい？
ええ、ちょっと。でもそれより今はジュンさんのことです。ジュンさん、大丈夫ですか？ジュンさん。
After Natsuhiko called her name, Jun eventually groaned.
あれ、夏彦君にゆりちゃん。
With vacant eyes, Jun looked at each person in turn, in the shelter one by one. Then, as if realizing something, she gasped.
私、なんてことを。
ジュンさん、意識ははっきりしてますか？
うん。でも、なんか変なんだよ。さっきまでの私、完全におかしかったよね。
Correct.
それが急に元に戻ったっていうか。
Just a bit of emergency therapy? Natsuhiko was relieved to hear those words from Jun.
それなら大丈夫です。今のジュンさんが本来のジュンさんですよ。
本来の私？
今この施設内にはそういう心理状況に陥る要因があるんです。誰もが攻撃的になり疑心暗鬼になるという。
ってどうしてそんなことが？
搬出リフトの前で発見された少女。あの子は強力なコミュニケーターだったんです。
She was Buzz.
彼女は周囲の人間の精神を悪意に満ちたものに変えていくという能力を持っていました。そのせいで施設内にいた人々はみんなおかしくなってたんです。
そんな BC にそんな力があるの？
Yeah. Understandable that you're surprised.
信じられないとは思いますが。
Correct. Jun looked a bit dubious for a while, but
自分の状態を鑑みると信じるしかなさそうだね。
I to believe that you tried to kill us out of your own free will, so.
もしかして浮田さんもそれでおかしくなってたの？
ああ。だからといって君を襲ったことを許してもらえるとは思わんがね。
Okita and Jun looked at each other awkwardly. A little while later, Jun politely bowed her head.
こちらこそ、さっきはすみません。刃物持って迫った挙句、なんかすごく失礼なことを言って。
She is not going to live this down with herself, is she?
いや、いいさ。あのくらい言われて叱るべきだ。
It seemed that the discord between the two of them was settled for now. Anna took a deep breath and whispered to Natsuhiko.
天川君、信じてくれてありがとう。おかげでなんとか収束できたみたいね。
いえ、むしろ先生のおかげです。
先生が悪意に感染してなくて本当に助かりました。
You're just that good at closing her heart. Off from BC, I guess. Super detective training. Natsuhiko and Yuri bowed their heads in gratitude.
バカね、二人とも。安心するのはまだ早いでしょ。
See, now I'm paranoid. Now I'm gonna be constantly looking at my mic levels in OBS just because that one video where my mic feed cut out halfway through, so it missed literally all of my commentary for half of the friggin' video. And it wasn't even an obvious jump cut where I paused the recording for a bit and came back. It just died in the middle and didn't know.
森部さんの様子を見るに、悪意感染の有無は自覚できないんでしょ。
You might be infected with malice and don't even know it
だ
yet.
から、私が悪意に感染してないとは限らないじゃない。
You haven't reacted in any way that would suggest it, which means if you are infected with malice, it's some seriously insidious malice. Once Natsuhiko heard that, he promptly stood between Enna and Yuri. Enna just placed her gun on the floor and spoke with a smile.
慌てないで。私は多分悪意に感染してないわ。
Oh,
そんな悪意感染の確証もないのに先生の心を覗けって言うんですか。
he certainly felt guilty about doing something like that. Enna tried to persuade him.
天川君、あなたがそれを嫌がるのもわかるわ。あなたはずっと BC 能力を使うことを嫌がっていたものね。適正度 S のあなたが本来自由に使えるはずの BC 能力をずっと発言しなかったのは、あなた自身がそれを拒んでいたから。
Correct. For very trauma-related reasons, but
人の心に踏み込むことをあなたはずっと避けていたんでしょ。
はい。
now that he thought about it, Anna was exactly right. The manifestation of BC abilities was greatly affected by the user's will. That was why Natsuhiko's BC abilities had never flourished.
だけど天川君、今のあなたは BC 能力を自在に使えている。それはあなたが今それを必要だと思っているからよ。
And plus, there's a fuck ton of WX particles running around.
でも先生の心を覗くことが今必要なこととは思えません。
いいえ、私があなたたちの信頼を得るためにはそれをしてもらうしかないわ。だって天川君も他のみんなも私を怪しいと思っているでしょ。
Anna smiled wryly as Natsuhiko found himself at a loss for an answer.
それも当然よ。私は誰に対しても心を閉ざし、嘘ばかりついてきたから。もはや言葉で何を言っても上滑りするばかりだけど。
Remarkably self-aware of you.
心を覗いてもらえば、私が何を考えて行動していたのか、すべて理解してもらえると思うの。
Anna placed her hand on Natsuhiko's shoulder.
記憶は嘘をつかないわ。だから、私の心に潜って、私の人生を追体験して。そうすればきっと、あなたたちも私を信じてくれるはずだから。
Just appreciation for being hella bold here. Indeed, that probably would help them understand her feelings. Allow them to learn Enna's true identity and the reason her heart was closed as well. So I know I didn't really understand these choices and why setting Natsuhiko so low. Was the one that got us more information. And now that I'm thinking about it, I don't exactly remember the rationale I was told, but it's essentially putting their Yeah, it's Natsuhiko's value for the other person versus his own value to just get the shit done and get out of their head. So if we value them higher than we value our desire to get in and get out and get on with life, then we'll get the further details. What should I do? If I do go through with memory access, how exactly do I go about it? What I need to confirm was Eda's true identity, and what motivated her to mobilize in Labo today, as well as whether or not she was infected with malice. Should I look in detail, or just do a quick check? I think it's best to keep exposure of other people's minds to a minimum, but... That's what he thought of me for a second, but then another thought suddenly welled up in his gut. Now, I really should learn about Professor Tsubakiyama in detail. It seems to be what she wants too, after all. With that thought in mind, Natsuhiko declared to Enna.
わかりました。そんなに言うのでしたら、先生の記憶を覗かせてもらいます。
It really is, in this case, Enna's will for us to understand her life versus our will to just check in and get out.
先生の人生を僕も体験させていただきます。
As Natsuhiko said that, Yuri nodded beside him.
私もそうさせてもらいます。先生を心から信じたいから。
Those words brought a gentle smile to the teacher's face.
ありがとう、二人とも。
By the way, is Watase okay?
私も今度こそ心を開くわ。私の頭の中にあるのが
Oh.
この国の真実の姿よ。
Oh fuck. As Enna gave them that veiled warning, the kids walked up to her and activated Senses Sympathy. It was 16 years ago. Back when Enna was still 8 years old. She was strolling around town with the father she loved.
エナ、ここがお父さんの新しい職場だよ。
Oh.
ああ、立派な建物。
And his father took her to his workplace. He gently responded to her innocent voice.
超心理学研究所って言うんだ。以前から超能力とかを研究してたちょっと変わった施設だったんだけど、超能力っていうものがどうやら実際に存在するものだと最近になって分かってね。
超能力？素敵。
ワクワクするだろう。大人たちもその発見にすんごくワクワクしたんだよ。それで人員を急増することが決まり、お父さんもここに転属になったってわけさ。
じゃあお父さんも超能力を研究するの？
Oh, I love baby Enna.
しないしない。お父さんは研究者じゃなくて役人だからね。
じゃあお父さんは何をするの？
Supervise them.
超能力者たちを守るのさ。
Oh.
守る？誰から守るの？
悪い人たちからだよ。超能力者たちはこれまでよそですごくいじめられててね。
かわいそう。
そうだろう。だからお父さんたちが守ってあげなきゃならないって思って超能力者を守るための部署を立ち上げたのさ。超能力者をいじめる悪者がいたらお父さんたちが捕まえる。逆に超能力が悪用されたらその時もお父さんたちが止めるのさ。
かっこいい。なんかおまわりさんみたい。
Pretty much.
そうだね。さしずめお父さんたちは BC 警察ってところかな。
エナも大人になったらお父さんみたいなお仕事したい。
お、いいね。一緒の職場で働ける日を楽しみにしておこうかな。
Ah. Enna's father smiled. Enna looked forward for that day to come as well. So what happened to Enna's father? But about half a year afterwards, she realized that day would never come. September 16th, 2014. The Great Rokumi City arson. Events that night would later be called by that name. Fires broke out all at the same time in 15 different spots in Rokumi City. Starting with the Rokame City Hospital, various buildings such as civilian residences, public facilities, multi-tenant buildings, and apartments were indiscriminately set fire to. And were burned down in that one single night. 118 casualties. Among them were 67 deaths due to carbon monoxide poisoning, 34 deaths due to fire, 11 deaths due to falling from high places, 3 deaths due to shock, and 2 suicides. And finally, 1 person stabbed to death by an arsonist. The one stabbed was an ordinary civil servant. To those who did not know him, he was just another one of the 118 lives lost that night. Not to Enna. To Enna, he was her beloved, irreplaceable father. Several days after the fires, Enna visited her father's workplace alone.
お父さん
No matter how many times she called out, there was no answer. She would never hear that gentle voice again. Tears that had streamed down on the day of the funeral service dampened her cheeks again. Her father had been killed that day trying to protect someone from an arsonist. Anna did not know who her father had died protecting. Even without knowing who it was, she understood one thing. Daddy was probably trying to protect an Esper. One of the bad guys. Anna looked up to the sky. Swore to protect what her father had tried to. To one day take up the same work her father had.
お父さん約束守るからねそれまで天国からエナを見ててね
For a young girl like her, it was still a lofty dream. But Anna swore on that dream in her heart, nevertheless, as she wiped her tears. After she had lost her beloved father, Anna and her mother moved away from Rokame City to a neighboring town. Her mother refused to stay in a town that served as a constant reminder of sad memories. Even in the new town, Anna grew to follow in her deceased father's footsteps. She continued to pursue a job to protect communicators just like her father had, but it was by no means an easy path to follow. Her father was a government official at the ESP Bureau of the Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science, and Technology. Mexed. Yeah. I was gonna pronounce Mex, but it literally MECSST when pronounced phonetically comes out exactly like MEXT. That's clever. The ESP Bureau, founded in April 2014, was the organization single-handedly responsible for the administration of BC-related activities. She had thought that by entering the organization she'd be able to obtain the same work as her father, but once she had gone into middle school and started investigating her father's life, she noticed something curious. For some reason, all employment records of him beyond his assignment to the PRC in April 2014 had been erased. There was an absolute dearth of information on what sort of work he did for the 5 months leading up to his death on September 16th. What's the meaning of this? Was he doing some sort of special work? When Anna questioned her about the anomaly, her tight-lipped mother eventually caved in and spoke about her husband's work. Anna's father was a communicator commissioner. Communicator commissioners managed and protected communicators outside of the public eye. That knowledge, Anna pursued her father's footsteps even more fervently. She majored in parapsychology at university, earning exceptional grades. As she graduated, she slipped through all the obstacles to enter the ESP Bureau. But before she knew it, 13 years had passed since her father's death. On her first day at the ESP Bureau, Anna went to greet her direct superiors. In a certain building in Tokyo, Anna opened a door and went inside a room.
失礼します
Oh wow. On the other side of the door were 2 men. They turned to look at Anna and spoke up.
おお、お前が例の新人の子か。
本日より配属された椿山恵奈と申しますよろしくお願いします
コミュニケーター管理課第一室長の黒田だ。
よろしくお願いします。
同じく管理官の比嘉
You look like a jerk. I'm not pleased to work with you.
ま、楽にしてくれ。うちは BC 警察なんて揶揄される部署だが、無論本物の警察じゃない。そんなに格式ばらなくていい。
I like your hair clip.
は、恐れ入ります。
It's a facet of you we never really see. I like that, it's a cute detail. Despite her words, Enna didn't relax her posture at all. A man named Kuroda smiled wryly to see that as he spoke up to her.
まあいいさ。仕事の話をしようか。聞いてるとは思うが、うちは BC に関する様々な行政活動を担っている部署でな。職域はコミュニケーターの保護、管理、監視から BC 関連の犯罪摘発までかなり手広くやっている。人員は文科省はもちろん、厚労省や薩長、公安などから出向したもので構成される。ま、よく言えばエキスパート集団、悪く言えば寄せ集め部隊さ。何しろ年々コミュニケーターを取り巻く状況は緊迫化し、文科省だけでは対応できなくなってな。
That's a hell of a range there. At best, we know what the fuck we're doing, and worst, we're just a bunch of fucking nooligans. Just fucking around.
お前の親父さんがいた頃に比べると、大幅に組織も強化されたってわけさ。
黒田室長は父をご存知なのですか？
俺が若い頃お世話になった上司だよ。あの人からはいろんなことを教わったんだ。当時は椿山室長と俺を含めても10人しかいない小さな部署だったが、今じゃすっかり大所帯さ。
そうなんですか。
Anna was pleased to have met someone who knew her father professionally, rather.
椿山室長の娘さんよ。お前はどんな管理官になりたい？
父のような命を賭してでもコミュニケーターを守る、そんな管理官になりたいです。
そうか。
Ah. Kuroda smiled sadly at that declaration.
お前には親父さんのようにはなってほしくないな。
I don't want you to die.
親父さんの足跡を追いたくなる気持ちはわかるが、お前はまだコミュニケーターの危険性を分かっちゃいない。そんなことじゃ親父さんと同じ運命をたどっちまうぞ。
Kuroda watched Enna as she caught the meaning of those words.
そのことを俺たちに知らしめたのが他でもない、椿山室長が保護を担当していたコミュニケーターだ。BC 研究の被験体として超真剣に迎え入れられた女、通称コミュニケーター A。
Alright, give me that sweet communicator A lore.
彼女は普通のコミュニケーターと違ってな、センシズシンパシーという極めて危険な能力を持っていたんだよ。
センシズシンパシーですか？
Ah. So she was involved with, or at least knew of, communicator A.
知らないのも当然だ。国を挙げて隠していることだからな。
I forgot to narrate that line. That was an ability that even Anna, a parapsychology major, had never heard of.
これは BC の中でもズバ抜けて危険な能力でな。我々がコミュニケーターの管理を厳しく行う理由に直結してるのさ。
If Senses Sympathy became public knowledge, people would freak the hell out. Kuroda explained the ability to Enna. Sensory sharing, memory manipulation, memory erasure, and the final phenomenon associated with that ability, the collapse of the communicator's mind. With repeated usage of Senses Sympathy, the communicator's sense of self would cease to function. Oh. And at the same time, they became a lump of malice, spreading curse-filled thoughts throughout their surroundings. But it was hard for Enna to believe.
本当なのですか？その話。
嘘ついても始まらねえだろう。
Correct.
ともかくコミュニケーター A はその生涯の中で幾度となくセンシズシンパシーを使い、結果として悪意の塊になった。
Ah.
なぜ A は何のためにそんな危険な能力を多用したのですか？
Because the government made her so they could study it, right?
そんなもの使う理由がないでしょ。父や 超神剣の研究員たちはそれを止めなかったのですか？
It seems like the obvious answer we're heading towards. A bad feeling welled up in Anna's chest as she watched Kuroda fall silent.
まさか超神剣の研究員たちが BC 研究のために
I mean,
センシズシンパシーの使用を強いていたのでは？
given that she was probably literally case zero of disability senses sympathy, and they're doing it to just to get some sort of sense of what the fuck it is, it's natural that scientifically, with their willingness to discard the effect on human life, that scientifically they keep having her do it to push the limits of disability and learn more. Ethics be damned. Her well-being be damned.
違う。
Oh, alright. Kuroda forcefully interrupted Anna.
そういう風に誤解している奴がうちの組織の内外にもいるが、真相は全く違うんだ。
Well, now I feel silly.
超神剣は当時、コミュニケーター A の治療をしようと全力を挙げたんだ。
Cure?
それに、彼女が悪意の塊になったのは、日本に来てからのことじゃない。故郷フランスにいる時に、すでにその兆候が出てたんだよ。
Oh. As Anna's eyes widened, Kuroda handed her an old newspaper article.
これはアンドレジーの魔女狩り事件の記事。
Oh, this again.
さすが。よく知ってるな。
This French jibber jabber.
学生時代に自分で資料を探りましたから。
As Anna majored in parapsychology, she gained a fairly deep understanding of the history of BC. And from there she learned the details of this particular incident as well. There was a modern witch hunt in February 2014 in Andresi. Victim, Alice Enflamme, very apt name, was a girl who was 18 years old at the time of the incident. Ever since she was young, she demonstrated various abilities, and as a result, she was shunned by people around her, including her biological parents. Regardless, Alice's parents profited off of her abilities. They founded a new religion. You could make religion out of this, labeling Alice as a child of God and her telepathy as oracles, as they ripped money off of believers in what was essentially fraud. Those fools resented her. Her parents never loved her, and instead used her as a part of a money-making scheme day after day. Her spirit must have worn down considerably. The years went by. By the time she turned 16, a new phenomenon occurred. Lawyers who had sued the religious organization for fraud were inexplicably falling victim to memory loss and stupefaction one after another. The local police hypothesized that religious officials had used some form of drug to induce memory defects in the lawyers, but the lawyers' bodies showed no sign of drug reactions, and thus the investigation made no developments. One day, the dark side of the church was brought to light. A certain scientist had established a genetic test to determine BC aptitude. Townspeople began to recognize the existence of communicators. Eventually, people investigating the religious organization's illegal acts began to think, is Alice actually a communicator and not a child of God? To check their suspicions, they ran a genetic test on Alice, and found a result that nobody had ever seen before. SSS! Super stylish Sanavia. IGF-2R gene abnormality type SS. Super smokin' stylish. Alice was the world's first confirmed rank S aptitude communicator. Fraud victims and believers alike were enraged at the test results. The child of God we believed in was just an ordinary human with a genetic mutation. I mean, bold of this game to assume that followers of the child of God would be so willing to accept scientific evidence. As we see, that's less common than you might think. Alice is nothing but a filthy phony who used this bizarre powers granted to her by her defective genes to deceive people. Her power is by no means a power of God. Rather, it is a power of the devil, a witch's power. devoutly faithful had clung on to that delusion. Their resentment for having been deceived intensified, and in conjunction with their fear of communicators, their malice reached critical heat, and the people became insurgents. The building that served as both the church and Enflamme family home was set aflame. Set en flamme. Alice's parents died in the fire, but Alice herself narrowly escaped the burning church. Next morning, once the local firefighters had her in protective care, an abnormal spectacle unfurled. A group of insurgents who tried to attack Alice lost consciousness and fell all around her. Afterwards, Alice went missing. Those were the details of the Andressi witch hunt, the incident that became the first page in the history book of anti-communicator terrorism. It was an incident that Anna had already known about, but by connecting what she had just heard from Kuroda, she realized a new truth. It's not written in the article, but could Alice have used Senses Sympathy? Then was the string of incidents of lawyers losing their memories a result of Alice using memory manipulation? The insurgents fainted as a result of her using that ability in self-defense. There's a more important matter at hand. I have a question about that family dynamic. I suppose I had something that didn't feel right in the back of my head, but I just thought of a way to justify it. Her parents didn't love her, clearly taking advantage of her. One, how did they know she could do this with memories? Number two, why would she do this? And not just target her parents instead? The answer to number two that just popped into my head was, that endless struggle to try and win the appreciation of parents who've never shown you any love. That painful longing for some kind of love when it was never there to begin with. That's why she probably did what she could to protect her parents. And the bastards never appreciated her for it. They just took advantage of her. Greedy fucking French Peter Popov. And a question Kuroda with a trembling voice.
どうして私にこの記事を見せたのですか？父の話がなぜこの記事とつながるのですか？
I have a bad feeling about that.
決まってるだろう。お前の親父さんが生前保護したコミュニケーターというのが
Infected him with malice.
そのアリス・アンフラメ、後のコミュニケーター A だったからさ。
Kuroda continued as Anna gasped in astonishment.
魔女狩り事件の後、世界中でコミュニケーターの差別、迫害が頻発した。
Correct.
だが当時の六名士と超神拳はその流れに逆行し、コミュニケーターの保護を進めたんだ。
Innocents talking out of both sides of their ass.
差別を受けたコミュニケーターに六名士への移住を進め、BC 研究の被験体になる代わりに生活を全面支援する。平穏に暮らしたいコミュニケーターと BC 研究を進めたい超神拳の利害が一致したのさ。
Keep in mind this is before the Great Rokame City arson, which is the inciting incident for them to start isolating aptitude level S communicators deep underground.
そしてくしくも超神拳に最初に迎えられ、椿山室長が保護を担当したのが他でもないコミュニケーター A だったんだ。
そんなことって。
またも信じられないようだな。じゃ、これを読んでみろ。
Kuroda handed Anna a printed stack of papers.
椿山室長が記した A の保護観察日記だ。
Probation?
彼の使用していた完成 PC に残っていた。正式な報告日誌ではなく、単なる個人的な記録のようだが、当時この町で何が起きたかを知るには極めて重要な資料だ。
Anna read her father's journal as instructed. It was a very informal journal. In it was a record of the afterdays Alice had experienced when she had survived and overcome the crime that had come before. April 5th. Today began the first communicator probation of one who was shown into Rogame City and the PRC from outside. I am the commissioner in charge of her. In the next, I had advanced through the fields of education and developmental psychology. Guess my personal history had been held in high regard. Then there's Assistant Communicator Commissioner Kuroda, a young man who transferred from the National Police Agency. He's a master of Taiho Jutsu and Nippon Kempo, so it seems he will also be doubling as my bodyguard. To provide me with a bodyguard must mean that the upper ranks seem cautious regarding the current subject under protection. It's not unreasonable. After all, the communicator I had been put in charge of is none other than Alice Unflam. And now that I've actually met her, Alice is an 18-year-old girl with innocent features appropriate for her age. Perhaps due to the cruel persecution she has faced in her hometown, her eyes are always full of fear. She's only just now come to Japan, so perhaps the culture shock is another cause for her fear. We must protect her. There are efforts to hide Alice's past, though researchers at the PRC have given her the designation Communicator A. Isn't that name just a little too blunt? She's not a literal lab rat for crying out loud, correct? So at least in this journal of mine, I will call her Alice, because names are important. Very correct. Well, 7. Researchers in charge of Alice have been chosen. Leader of the research team is Azumi. He's an extremely reliable friend of mine from our school days. I can leave Alice in his care without qualms. Alice is still frightened, but let's spend the time slowly to get her to open her heart to us. May 5th. A month has passed since Alice has arrived into Japan. Appears to be overcoming her fear and growing accustomed to the new environment little by little each day. At the start, we were unable to initiate any sort of communication. Gradually, she's been showing compliance with our intentions. Rhoda, Azumi, and I all receive Alice with gentleness from the bottom of our hearts. But Alice seems to open her heart the most to Azumi. I'm somewhat jealous. My wife and Anna are waiting for me at home. It's not like I'm bitter about it or anything. But Crota's single, so he's really bitter. Poor guy. Crota, you're probably well into adulthood. Don't even. As the days of deep experimentation pass, we've taught Alice a few things about Japan. As a result, today Alice learned her first Japanese word, Konnichiwa, an awkward but understandable greeting. When I heard it, it reminded me of the first time Anna spoke, so I was moved. We were so happy that we all answered repeatedly in Alice's native language. Bonjour, bonsoir, salut, merci, c'est si bon, très bien, and so forth, everything we could think of. Those last two didn't really have much to do about anything, and they probably butchered the pronunciation. Merci beaucoup. When she heard our broken French, Alice smiled just a little bit. May 27th. The PRC has other research teams besides ours. They are each in charge of a different communicator and conduct various experiments and ability training exercises. Today we exchanged information with a different team. Researcher Miyoko Tenkawa and Shun Tenkawa, aka Communicator A. Oh! Natsuhiko's dad? We're taking a parapsychology approach, but they seem to be using physics techniques to explain what exactly the ability called BC is. Wow, they're literally working together to study Natsuhiko's dad's abilities. We would expect nothing less from the married couple of our country's highest aptitude communicator and the young genius physicist. Something truly motivating is how Miyoko Tenkawa keeps her sharp tongue and pointed opinions despite being 8 months pregnant. Wow. June 22nd. A major incident happened today. Miyoko Tenkawa suddenly went into labor and was taken to the hospital. Those of us left in the PRC were worried about her, but it seems she had a safe delivery. Even the aloof Mr. Shun Tenkawa seemed to have shed tears, streams of tears, upon seeing the birth of his son. When we explained the situation to Alice, she too smiled with her whole face. It seemed the birth It seems the birth of a new life is a joyous occasion in all cultures. June 29th. It seems Kuroda is a smoker, which is odd these days. Must not be paying enough attention to not have noticed it. Right when Kuroda went to the designated area to smoke, Alice just happened to be walking by. Oh, and upon seeing the lighters flame, she burst into tears. Oh. Probably triggered memories of when her house was set on fire. It wasn't Kuroda's fault, but he needs to be reprimanded. Azumi stroked her hair until she calmed down, in the same way one comforts a crying child. July 2nd. At any rate, lately, the eyes Azumi looks at Alice with don't seem to be the eyes of a researcher. They're the eyes of affection. Perhaps the affection of a parent, perhaps the affection of a lover. It better be the former. It better be the former. Alice seems to care for Azumi as well. Not once in his life had Azumi spoken of love. He dedicated his entire life to research, but perhaps spring had finally come for him. Or am I just thinking too hard here? At any rate, I can only pray for happiness in their future. July 5th. A problem occurred. A citizen group has risen up in opposition of how Rokumi City is attracting communicators. The problem isn't them, but rather Alice's reaction to them. Very much an emotional trigger, I assume. Fire is an extreme trigger of hers. And angry mobs, angry crowds, probably just as much a trigger to the poor gal. On some days like yesterday, the citizen group carries out demonstrations in front of the PRC. They've been chanting in unison with a megaphone, like a classic protest. Probably believe in their own brand of justice as they advocate their opinions. But Alice's reaction to them was not in the least bit trivial. She plugged her ears, cried out loud, cowered, and trembled, almost like a child. Her panic attack continued until we had to sedate her. Oh, Jesus. The citizen group probably triggered memories of the arson incident she encountered in her hometown. She came all the way to this safe haven in order to escape from that terrifying memory. Yet once again she fell victim to persecution. Girl needs serious therapy here. Jesus Christ. She's been through hell. And I have a bad feeling that what I called from way back when is going to turn out to be right. That although I believe in my original case I said that it was the PRC's fault that this happened, and that still remains to be seen, but I very much believe that this was not an act of malice by Alice. That it was very much a trauma-related stress reaction. It probably caused her to escape in a blind panic and spread her traumatic memories wildly throughout the city as she escaped, which inadvertently set off a bunch of everyone to burn shit. Jesus Christ. Oh. Welcome to the tip zone. We have a fuck ton of tips. Let's read about the Andresi witch hunt. The French government has defined some antisocial religious groups as sects, and made efforts to clearly define the line between these sects and other religions. The government was faced with the problem of religions abusing the precedents in laws and human rights afforded to them by France's value systems. In 2001, France adopted an anti-sect law, prompting legislation from the rest of Europe, and in March 2012, a certain French sect triggered an incident, a sect named under the name of God, which deified a 16-year-old girl as a child of God, was accused of committing fraud against its believers. Lawyers who attempted to prosecute the sect fell victim to memory loss and stupefaction one after the other. Local police in charge of the investigation suspected the sect of drugging the lawyers, but there was no trace of evidence. The investigation reached a deadlock. Afterwards, the investigation tackled the incident once again from an unexpected angle. That December, Antoine Courbet, Betelgeuse New Treatment's brain psychologist who had placed himself in France, proposed the ESP synchronization hypothesis. According to that hypothesis, inspection of the IGF2R gene would allow for the screening of so-called espers who possessed ESP, Many scholars brushed off that theory as mere quackery. The plausibility of ESP's existence began to spread by mouth throughout the town, and in February 2014, Alice and Flum, age 18 at the time, underwent a genetic test on the basis of that theory. The results turned that situation on its head, where she turned out to be a top-class Esper, the world's first rank S aptitude communicator. Shit. The faithful who believed Alice was a child of God now deemed her as a witch born of a genetic mutation. Their rage surged into an insurgency, and they set fire to the church that served as her house. The local fire department's efforts quelled the insurgency in just one night, but two major mysteries remained from that tragic incident. First, why did the insurgents that attacked Alice all lose consciousness? Second, where did Alice disappear to afterwards? Such is the incident known to the world as the Andresi witch hunt. Oh wow, there's a lot to read today. Oh shit, fuck, shit. My goddamn mouse. Communicator Commissioner. A government official attached to the ESP Bureau, tasked with the management, protection, and observation of communicators. The existence of communicator commissioners is hidden from the public, and thus commissioners are issued false titles and identification to hide their status. Everything a commissioner learns on the job is confidential, and even the fact that they have the job. Business requires complete understanding of both the dangers communicators pose and why they need to be protected. The position is extremely mentally taxing, and thus commissioner candidates are often transfers chosen from the best of other departments like the National Police Agency or the Public Security Bureau. Back to our list. Chanting in unison. The choral chanting of a single line in unison at a stage is called Sprecher. Sprecher in German and in Japanese. It can also in turn refer to demonstrators or protesters chanting slogans or demands in unison. Many German loanwords have entered the Japanese language, particularly medical terminology such as krank, gas, gips, capsule, vaccine, neuros. As for everyday words, the Japanese language has adapted hierarchy, Galende, rucksack, Baumkuchen, and Arbeit. And while not German loanwords, some words of the Japanese language are surprisingly rooted in Portuguese, like casutera, from pau de castela, and competo, from confeito. Ah. Taijutsu? General term for martial arts techniques used for the apprehension and restraint of suspects, culprits, and other ruffians by the police, Coast Guard officers, self-defense force, military police, and other such judicial police officials granted the authority to perform criminal searches by the provisions of the Criminal Procedure Code. Whew! Empty-handed techniques are based off of Nippon Kempo, Judo, and Aikido, while baton techniques are based off of Kendo. In the event the official has a police cane, they use Jojutsu. In addition, they practice combat with imitation guns and other tools for all sorts of situations imaginable. Taijutsu is built from the accumulated knowledge of police organizations, public safety departments, self-defense force, and security guard departments, but since the most important principle is that the art is to be used only for restraining the opponent, the techniques are devised to minimize any unnecessary damage dealt to them. Police specific. ESP Bureau. Department of the Ministry of Mext. I'm not reading all that shit again. Established in April 2014 in reaction to the ESP synchronization hypothesis proposed by Antoine Corbet in 2012, as well as to the Andresi witch hunt in February 2014. The Bureau was hastily formed to receive the concerned party of the witch hunt, Alison Flam, as Communicator A, and thus at the time it was seen as a disorganized group of just a handful of people. The Bureau conducts administrative activity in Rokame City. Its main function was to cooperate with the PRC to encourage communicator migration into Rokame City and support their lifestyles. But after the Great Rokame City arson, the importance of the Bureau was re-evaluated and all BC-related administrative activity was delegated to them henceforth. The Bureau has roughly equal authority as the police to expose BC-related crimes, and thus today, some jokingly call the ESP Bureau the BC Police. Correct. Parapsychology Research, PRC, more specifically the Rokame City PRC. Rokame City's facility for BC research, also called the PRC for short. In the past, the PRC produced many remarkable research results at the hands of those like Natsuhiko Tenkawa and Jin Tsubakiyama. With the completion of Labo, most of the PRC's equipment and documents were secretly relocated. The PRC currently only functions as a front to hide the truth that Labo is currently the real BC research facility. That said, anyone who has the opportunity to see inside the PRC, even non-specialists, would be able to realize that it is not a cutting-edge research facility at all. When Anna took the Rokumi City Academy Class 1B to the PRC, part of her motivation was to take full advantage of her position as a teacher to inspect and reconfirm the current state of the PRC. It's also easy to imagine that she felt a little happy to see the workplace of her diseased father. I think you mean deceased. Yeah, I was gonna say, it feels like her bluster there was a mix of legitimate joy to be back in the PRC. Makes sense that she'd want to inspect them too, and also feel like she's there putting on the front to sell the lie of sorts. Nippon Kempo, a competitive martial art devised by judo practitioner Muneomi Sawayama, where practitioners wear armor and gloves to use punching, kicking, and judo locking techniques. Often referred to simply as Kempo or Nikken in Japan, Nippon Kempo is a Ran, or freeform Kempo. Instead of relying on structured kata, its core revolves around both practitioners freely exchanging blows as they master their fists. This free-form style of hand-to-hand combat was conceptualized from the ancient Greek martial art of pancration. Is that adapted to become No, it's probably actual... Hang on. I know the nerd in me. Just want to see if it's an actual... Yeah, it's just the name pancration reminds me of the Japanese nerd in me, thinking about the hybrid mixed martial arts and pro wrestling company Pancrase, founded in the 90s in Japan, where absolute beasts like Boss Rutan and Minoru Suzuki, and but it's enough of me talking about stuff you don't care about. Since it allowed for the free use of many different techniques long before mixed martial arts, Nippon Kempo had a big influence on such things as the Japan Self-Defense Force's barehanded combat drills and the police's Taiho Jutsu. Okay, wow, we made it through there. I am nervous to see how this plays out. Feeling's gonna play out exactly how we thought it would, but I'm still nervous to see it play out. It's still gonna hurt. So until next time, until then.